Hello, friends. Let's watch Normal People, episode 4.
Available in the early weeks, and I cannot overstress this. Start reading early. Read early and read often. And while I have you all here, I should make you aware of the dual B.
I love this segment because we're going to see Connell be in the school environment, in the classrooms for the first time. And we could see that while he's there, he's constantly looking for Marianne. He's constantly scanning his environment to see whether or not he could see her, because he hasn't seen her since high school, when he basically completely betrayed her and asked her bully out to prom, and she broke it off with him. Think about it really quick. He's in a completely new part of his life, new environment. There's so much stimulus. He has to consider all these new classes, all these new classmates, all the professors, like, what is this new life going to entail? And despite all of that, he still thinks about Marianne. So much so that he's looking for her in every room that he enters. Every time he's walking anywhere, he's carrying her in his soul, and he's still looking for her because he still wants to connect to her. Like, even if he's not consciously looking for her, it's like his subconscious still holds on to that connection. And therefore, even if he's not trying, he's looking for her because he still wants to be connected to her in that way. It's really sad, but it's also so romantic in a weird way. But again, even if it's romantic, part of Connell's character growth has to come from him developing a sense of self outside of her. So yes, there's like a staircase of growth, right? The first step is for him to accept that he loves her, accept that she exists in his soul and is a part of him. But the step after that is almost like loving her with a sense of detachment and letting go of her in a way where he can still find who he is, his power, what he loves outside of Marianne, and see where she lies in that journey. You know, after Connell discovers himself, after Connell figures out what it means to accept and love himself, will he still love Marianne the same way? Will they still get along in the same ways? That's the true testament of unconditional love. And so, yeah, it's just so interesting and yummy to watch a character growth happen throughout a series like this in all of these little ways. Still looking around for her.
Claro, tem as cadeiras específicas, redação, televisão, mas também tem as cadeiras.
And another really interesting thing that we're discovering about Connell now that he's in a completely new environment is how much of a hermit he is, like how shut in he is. Him around his high school friends, he was able to almost afford hiding behind a mask because those people took up so much space, and he was already integrated into that group ahead of time. And so there wasn't really much effort he needed to put into existing and being with those people. But now that he's put in a completely new environment, what it would take for him to find a group of friends and find a routine is to put himself out there and to implant himself into different environments, different groups of people, to socialize, to put himself out there. And now that he has to do something like that, he realizes, or we realize, that he doesn't really put that much effort, and so therefore he becomes a loner. This is a really good example of what worked for you in an old environment and with an old situation with old people may not work for you if you picked yourself up from that place, put yourself somewhere new environment, new situation, new people. Those same coping mechanisms may not work anymore. Hiding yourself here made sense and got you by. but hiding yourself in this new environment is not gonna get you anywhere. You're gonna be alone in your room studying. You're gonna be alone in the library studying. You're gonna be cooking by yourself. You're gonna be, doing all of these things by yourself. And it's not just that you're lonely, but it also affects, especially if you're like Connell and you already don't have a good sense of self, it affects your relationship to yourself and your own self-growth, because when you're not putting yourself in situations to interact and riff off of others and put yourself in new situations, you're not giving yourself or your soul enough capacity to grow because you're not being challenged, which we're going to see more when Connell's in his English class and he's put in a situation where he has to talk about his opinions, talk about his observations in what he's read. And he comes up empty-handed because he doesn't really have an opinion. And him not having an opinion is in line with him not having a sense of self. Him not having a sense of self is in line with him isolating himself and not putting himself out there to connect with people. And so him isolating himself and not connecting with people ultimately affects him on a personal level, an interpersonal level. It also affects his ability to just exist and show up in his everyday life and thrive in his own art, in his own profession, in a sense. You have to have a core sense of self. That is so important. If any of you relate to Connell in any sort of capacity when it comes to not having a sense of identity and a core sense of self, just know you're not only harming yourself, you're harming what you could do for the world with your own talents and with your own story. Don't hide yourself. You're not doing anyone any favors by hiding yourself.
Just how much empathy Defoe writes her with, I feel like that's kind of radical when you read his contemporaries.
Also, how many examples of the picaresque novel are there that centre a woman so boldly and without condemning her?
Yeah, but also in terms of her class.
That's exactly what struck me. You get this really, really complex character. I think Defoe writes with incredible subtlety and attention to detail. It's sort of amazing.
I actually relate a lot to Connell in this scene because as an internal processor, which means I process things inside of myself to myself first, and then I only share once I've fully processed what I've already processed. So I don't really naturally externally process, right? Which means when you're an external processor, you're actively processing your thoughts as you're talking about it out loud. I'm not that type of person. I'm someone that sits with her thoughts, right? So I'm very much so like Connell in that sense. And I actually relate to him a lot in this scene because I've been him in this situation, in a lot of different situations in my life where when everyone's talking, especially group dynamics or in classroom settings, right? When they're supposed to be back and forth and there's so many people talking and talking and talking, I could be that person that tends to blend into the background and I'll have nothing to say. But it's not because I don't have anything to say. It's not because I'm not thinking and I'm not processing. It's almost the opposite. I'm processing so much, right? What this person's saying, what that person's saying, what this person's saying. How do all of their statements correlate with each other? How much does this statement say about that one person and information about them that I don't yet know, but because they had that opinion, it shows a lot about them and where they come from. Little details like, oh, this person wore that jacket again. They must really like that jacket. All of this detail is being processed when you're an internalized processor. But on the surface, it just looks like you're disconnected and you're not there in the conversation because you're not participating. But in reality, you're so hyper present that you almost don't have the capacity to even emote anymore because you're completely filled to the brim with so much information and it's just swirling around in you. And it takes a lot of intentional effort to work through all of that information and get yourself to a point where you're ready to talk about it out loud. And that's the thing. If you guys relate to being an internalized processor like me or like Connell, for us, we really do have to practice speaking about the things that we're processing. And we need to not only practice it, but we need to have trustworthy people in our life to practice it with that could help encourage us to process out loud or to share out loud. And we have to put ourselves in situations where we are encouraged to process out loud. And that's the thing, you know, like making videos online and talking about the things that I'm processing never came easy to me. Like, I only started getting somewhat used to talking out loud in these videos somewhat recently in this past year. And I've been on YouTube for, I don't know, 3 years now. Before YouTube, I was making TikTok videos for a year or two or something like that. Like, it took me multiple years of publicly speaking, like talking out loud for other people to hear, for me to finally get used to talking out loud and not having to run up against walls every single time I have to express myself. Because if you guys were around when I was first posting on YouTube, if you go back to my old videos, you probably will notice there's a lot of cuts in what I'm talking about. And it's because I was so not used to processing out loud that I had to like stop multiple times to collect my thoughts and then start over. And then none of my thoughts made sense when I would speak on it, because I would go out of order and then I would say things that didn't make sense. And so I had to cut things up and splice them together. I had a lot of filler words. So I would say a lot. I would say like a lot. And it's just, speaking out loud was like a muscle that I just never practiced. And I totally feel Connell, you know, like I totally feel what it's like to just sit there and go back and forth processing what everyone else is saying. Even if you're not ready to speak on what you think, you have those internal responses to what people say. Like, you process what Sally says and you're like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense, that this and that, and you have your own thoughts. But it's so hard to explain when you're an internalized processor. It's almost like you have to translate your actual thoughts multiple times before you're ready to concisely put it into what I like to call a thesis statement. So oftentimes I have all of these thoughts and they're normally memories, sensations, feelings. And in order for me to get to a point where I'm ready to talk about it, I have to take that sensory information and translate it into actual words. And then I have to not only do that, but I have to figure out what words make sense together to tell this story or to convey my thoughts properly. And then that's a whole other thing, right? Like, just because you receive in the mail a box of a deconstructed table doesn't mean you could just take the things out and it's ready to be used. You still have to take all of those pieces, put it together, and build the table so that you could use the table, right? That's what it feels like to be an internalized processor, is you get that box of furniture, you have to take all the pieces out, look at the instructions, and then painstakingly put the pieces together so that you could finally have the thing. And that thing, that table, is your opinion, is your thoughts about something. And that takes time. That's the difference between being an internalized processor versus an externalized processor. Is externalized processors process as they go, if that makes sense. What they're already thinking is already being spoken out loud. So oftentimes externalized processors figure out what they think as they're already sharing it. If you've ever seen someone, as they're saying something, have a realization like, oh, I didn't realize that until I said it out loud. Or as they're processing, they're like, oh, I think that's what it is, you know? That's an externalized processor. Does that make sense?
What about anyone else? Connell.
I thought it was very moving. Yeah, and I just agree with what everyone was saying. So, yeah.
And what Connell's going through right now is he knows what he's thinking, but he doesn't know how to convey it yet. There's too much going on. It's like word scramble in your head, and you have to go take all those words, put it out of your head and try to put them in order so that it might form a thought, it might form a sentence, and hopefully it's coherent, maybe. But when you're in a public situation like that and you're shy, you're introverted, when your thoughts and opinions aren't fully processed yet and people are telling you to speak on it, it's so scary because as you're talking out loud, you're realizing nothing I'm saying makes sense. I'm stumbling over my words, I'm stuttering. Everyone was able to so coherently talk about their thoughts as if it was nothing to them. And for me, it's so difficult. And then you feel bad about yourself because you almost think less of yourself in a sense, because you think, am I just dumb? Do I not have thoughts? Do I not have opinions? Am I not nuanced? Do I not see the things that other people see? Am I not as observant as I think I am? Or am I not observant at all? Like, this is part of why Connell has such low self-esteem, you know, because he never gets to practice expressing himself. He also doesn't put himself in situations to express himself. Therefore, he doesn't even know the value in what there is to express. Does that make sense? Like, if you don't pay attention to something and you ignore it long enough, you don't even realize it's there. You don't even realize it exists. If Connell doesn't draw on his strengths, if Connell doesn't speak on his opinions, if Connell doesn't put himself in situations to express himself and be encouraged in that and be validated in that, he will never reach a point where he feels good about himself. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you're hypothetically really, really good at making spaghetti, you know, like you have a talent for it. You're born out of the womb amazing at making spaghetti, but you go through your whole life never making spaghetti, you will also go through your whole life thinking that you're not a good spaghetti maker. Does that make sense? People have inherent talents. They have inherent things to express. But if you never tap into it, you will go the rest of your life thinking that there's nothing about you worthy of expressing. And that's really sad. Like, saying that out loud really like makes me tear up, that there's people out there that get so used to dimming their light that they will go through their whole lives thinking that they don't have a light to shine. It's just such a heartbreak. And sadly, a lot of neurodivergent people experience that.
Thanks.
So another difference we're going to see between Connell and Marianne as they're in college is that Connell on the weekends will drive all the way home from college just to visit home. And Marianne doesn't visit home at all. And it makes a lot of sense. Like, Connell somewhat fit into his home life. Even though he wasn't happy with it, he still fit in. But for Marianne, she was happy with herself, but because she was honoring herself, she didn't fit into her old life, her home life. And so now that they're away in college and they're both in a new environment, Marianne has a chance to branch out and to find things that resonates with her. But for Connell, it's like he's in this weird liminal space where he doesn't belong in the new environment. He is also not trying to make himself belong there. He's also going back to the old life, going back home on weekends to feel this familiarity, to feel like he fit in, to feel like he belongs somewhere. But the difficulty of Connell's experience is he's gonna feel out of place no matter where he goes. And he's just going around, going with the motions, getting drawn back to his old life, hoping that there's something there that he could feel familiar with and feel like he could click back into place there, only to realize he never clicked in place there to begin with. Yes, he might have messily put some glue on himself and try to stick himself there, and maybe to a certain extent it worked, but it's not the same as actually planting yourself in a new environment, an ecosystem, and actually growing roots there and becoming a part of that ecosystem. Connell hasn't experienced that yet. And so long as he keeps isolating himself and clinging on to his old life and what's familiar and what never worked for him and will continue to not work for him, he won't ever, ever, ever grow. The only way out is through. He has to make it through that very scary, uncomfortable, dark tunnel of self-discovery in order to arrive at a place where he challenges himself to actually find himself, connect that found self with other people, and grow roots in that experience, that new life.
Mom.
Hey,
Oh yeah.
welcome home.
Where have you been?
Just out with a friend, you know?
Oh yeah. It's fair enough.
She's so pretty.
Come here then.
Okay, Mom.
So good to see you.
Oh, seeing Connell's relationship with his mom is so sweet. Okay, but you know what I'm thinking about? One of the big reasons why Connell is the way he is, like very high masking, very deep sense of shame for himself. A lot of it probably has to do with the fact that, one, he's neurodivergent, and so he's already inherently different because he's a neurodivergent existing in a neurotypical world. That doesn't make sense to him, and they don't understand him either, right? But two, he grew up without a dad. He grew up with a dad that completely failed him and his mother and abandoned them. So given Connell's relationship with his mom and given who Connell actually is, right? I think Connell is a man of integrity. Connell is a man of attunement. Connell is a very deeply complex human being. And so when he sees what should have been a male figure in his life that was supposed to be there to guide, protect, and provide for his family completely leave and fail, I think a big aspect of him being such a high masker and being such a people pleaser is wanting to step into that empty space that his dad left. His dad failed them so much. And Connell, I think, on a deep core level, like one of his core wounds is probably, I don't want to fail myself, my mom, other people the way that my dad failed us. I want to show up every single time. But the difference is that Connell doesn't think that he could accomplish that by honoring himself. He thinks accomplishing showing up for others and being a good person means sacrificing your sense of self in order to show up for others. And so one of Connell's biggest lessons that he's going to have to learn is that you can show up, you could be the light in people's lives, you could be the backbone to a relationship, you could be a strong support system, you could be a really great friend, a really great student, a really great writer, a really great son, a really great partner, because you are who you are. And people love that. And that person is worth the time and effort and the connection. Think about how Connell tries so hard to fit into this perception of what a good boyfriend is, what a good son is, what a good student is, what a good man is, and how that's this idea of a person, right? And that's the thing, is Connell never had a male figure to observe and to teach him how to be a man. And Connell, in a sense, is figuring it all out on his own. And saying that out loud makes me want to cry. Because Even though Connell's making a lot of mistakes, even though Connell learns his lessons very slowly, at the end of the day, he's learning. He's still learning every step of the way. And he's doing it on his own. And that's really, really hard. That's really hard to do. Like, he didn't have a dad to teach him. He didn't have a dad to guide him. He didn't have a dad to look up to and try to model himself after. Connell's figuring it out on his own. So far, his way of showing up is to hide himself. But the intention is still there. He still wants to show up, even though it doesn't look like that to other people, right? Other people probably think, I'm putting so much effort to connect to you and you're kind of shutting me out and you're not really fully surrendering to this connection. You're not really fully showing up and actually connecting with me and sharing about yourself and being vulnerable. Like, there's always these very tall and thick walls up around you. Like, I don't know who you are. Like, everyone in his life probably thinks that of him. That doesn't mean Connell doesn't care. Yeah, let's just see what it's gonna take for Connell to bloom, in a sense, and reveal layer by layer who he is. Enjoyed today's video? Then consider becoming a YouTube member or joining the Patreon to gain access to all of my full commentary videos. See ya there.